Hey guys, good morning. Welcome back to our channel, the Eaton Squad. So in today's video is about the airlines that require negative swab test result before boarding. Coming right up. Before flying somewhere, or specifically flying back to the Philippines, all airlines doesn't really require any negative swab test result. But in the long run, they have required swab test result before you can board. So in this video, we are going to talk about airlines that requires swab test result upon boarding in your origin city or state or country. And we are also going to talk about airlines that doesn't require negative swab test result at all upon departure. So first, we are going to talk about the airlines that require negative swab test result if you are coming from the US going to the Philippines, or wherever this particular airline is servicing now requires a negative swab test result upon boarding. And our number one airline that requires negative swab test result is Etihad Airways. Make sure you have a COVID-19 PCR test before you fly. COVID-19 PCR testing is mandatory before every flight to give you the confidence to travel to the world again. You'll feel safe knowing that every guest flying with us has tested negative for COVID-19. Depending on where you are flying to or from, your test must be carried out between 48, 72, or 96 hours ahead of your flight departure time. Always check in advance. Your test can be taken at any government-accredited medical facility. Guests departing Pakistan and India must use an Etihad-approved medical facility. Children under 12 and people with severe and moderate disabilities are exempt from COVID-19 PCR testing, though this is subject to the regulations at your destination. Remember to print your test result, as you will be required to present it for validation at check-in. You must present a medical certificate or other relevant document clearly stating the type of test and the result. You may also present your test result via Al-Husn app or HOSN if you are flying to Abu Dhabi. Please take note of that app that you can present it via this app. If your test is positive or you are unable to present proof of your negative COVID-19 PCR test, you will not be permitted to travel. You can rearrange your flight for free or cancel and use the value of your flight towards your next trip with Etihad credit. So this is what the Etihad Airways protocol when you are flying with them. So please take note of these guidelines that they require a negative RT-PCR swab test before you board the aircraft. Our next airline that requires a negative swab test result before you board is EVA Airlines. Passengers are not permitted to transit through Taiwan unless they meet all of the following conditions. They are flying with China Airlines, EVA Air, or Cathay Pacific. They are arriving and departing with the same airline. They are in transit for no more than 8 hours. They are not departing from or transiting to China. They meet the entry requirements for their final destination. All passengers, including passengers in transit, must hold a negative COVID-19 test result certificate issued within 3 working days prior to departure, or they will be fined between 10,000 and 150,000 Taiwan dollars and may face liability. The 3 days are counted from the test report date and do not include public holidays in the country or region the certificate was issued or the day of scheduled time of departure. We actually have a video on this when EVA Airlines announced that they are now requiring a negative RT-PCR test before boarding. I will leave the link in the description box if you need more information about EVA Airlines' new travel restrictions. So please take note of these airlines that requires negative swab test result if you are coming from abroad, going to the Philippines if you are taking Etihad Airways or EVA Airlines. So for example, you are coming from the US going to the Philippines and you are flying with EVA Airlines or Etihad Airways, you will be required to show a negative RT-PCR test upon boarding. So now let us proceed with airlines that requires negative RT-PCR test if you are coming from the Philippines going back abroad. So our number one airline is Korean Air. All passengers, excluding Korean, departing from Uzbekistan, Philippines, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Bangladesh, and Nepal within the last 14 days and arriving or transferring to Korea via a third country need a PCR negative certificate. A certificate issued from medical institutions designated by diplomatic offices of Korea within 48 hours before departure. Passengers from Russia to Korea must have a PCR certificate issued 72 hours before arrival time in Korea. Passengers departing from Philippines regarding the validity period of PCR test result that are submitted by foreigners who are departing from the Philippines, please refer to the following changes effective November 11. Their existing protocol is test results that have been issued within 48 hours of flight or ship departure time. Now, their updated guideline is test results that has been issued within 2 days from the flight or ship departure day. From Manila to the US by transferring in Korea within 6 hours of connecting flight, no PCR negative confirmation required starting December 21. So please take note of those dates on the changes with Korean Airline when you are flying with them from the Philippines going back abroad. Our next airline that requires RT-PCR negative swab test result coming from the Philippines going back abroad is QATAR Airways. Public advisory on QATAR Airways, mandatory COVID-19 RT-PCR negative test results for passengers from the Philippines. The Department of Foreign Affairs informed the public of the recent announcement of QATAR Airways requiring passengers from several countries, including the Philippines, to present a negative COVID-19 RT-PCR upon check-in. Those unable to comply with this requirement, which shall be presented with a consent form, will not be allowed to board the airline's flights. Passengers must undergo the PCR test only at laboratories authorized by QATAR Airways. So please take note of this, that you can't just go to any laboratories, or you have to use the authorized laboratories by QATAR Airways. So heads up to those passengers who are flying with QATAR Airways from the Philippines going back abroad. Our next airline is EVA Airlines. We have discussed this earlier, that if you are coming from abroad and flying with EVA Airlines, they require a negative RT-PCR swab test result. This time, they still require a negative swab test result if you are flying with EVA Airlines coming from the Philippines going abroad. And still, you have to get your negative RT-PCR swab test result from an authorized laboratories by EVA Airline. Our next airline that requires a negative RT-PCR swab test result flying from the Philippines going back abroad is ASIANA Airlines. Required for possession of PCR negative test results of all foreigners, excluding Koreans, who depart from the following countries and enter or transfer to South Korea are Bangladesh, Kyrgyzstan, the Philippines, Uzbekistan, and Nepal. PCR negative test result issued from the national medical institutions designated by diplomatic offices within 48 hours of departure. So please take note, heads up to all travelers who are traveling with ASIANA Airlines coming from the Philippines going back abroad. you are required to present a negative RT-PCR swab test result before you depart. Our next airline that requires negative RT-PCR swab test result coming from the Philippines going back abroad is Delta Airlines. Passengers flying to the United States via connection flight through Korea are required to have a negative COVID PCR test result issued within 48 hours prior to departure. COVID-19 test can only be issued by designated facilities at passengers' own expense. Starting January 2020, Delta Airlines will operate a Manila US service via a connection through Korea. Passengers on the Delta flight will not be required to have a pre-departure COVID test. This is not until January 2020, but this time, if you are flying from Manila, going back abroad, you are still required to present a negative swab test result if you guys are flying with Delta Airlines. So please take note of that. And our last airline that requires a negative RT-PCR test flying from the Philippines going back abroad is Etihad Airlines. As we mentioned earlier, Etihad Airlines is also requiring a negative RT-PCR test if you are coming from abroad going to the Philippines. They also require a negative RT-PCR test if you are flying with them from the Philippines going back abroad. So please take note of that, and heads up to all passengers of Etihad Airways. So now let us proceed to other airlines that doesn't require any negative swab test result at all, whether you are coming from the US, going to the Philippines, or leaving from the Philippines going back abroad. So these are the airlines that does not require any swab test result upon boarding. Number 1 is Philippine Airlines. Number 2 is Japan Airlines. Number 3 is All Nippon Airways or ANA. Number 4 is Turkish Airlines. And number 5, Cathay Pacific. So these are the airlines that does not require any negative swab test result at all before you board the plane, whether you are going to the Philippines or leaving from the Philippines. So please take note of these airlines. And this is also a heads up to all travelers. If you want to avoid the hassle of going through a negative swab test result, these are the airlines that does not look for it at all before you board the aircraft. Thank you so much, guys. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends and family whom you know that can use this video as reference. And if you are new to our channel, welcome, welcome. We do travel updates. And if you are not a subscriber yet, please consider subscribing and hit that notification bell so you will get updates like this. And to our subscribers and new members of our family, thank you so much for the continued support and the continuous trust to our channel, the Eton Squad. I hope to see you guys in our next video. Stay safe, stay healthy, and God bless everyone. Bye!